Okay, I think now maybe this is working. Let's see if this is working. What happens if I go to my website? Does it show up as being there? Oh, hey, look, I think it's there. Okay, so I think this is working. We'll see if you have any questions. So if you're just watching this now, starting just a couple of minutes late on Sunday at 2 o'clock, and maybe nobody will have questions, which is great. But I'm not sure that that I did such a fantastic job of explaining the essay in enough time. So I wanted to give us some more time in case you do have questions. Remember, this is a timed writing, and that you will have, although it's like a full 59-minute period on Monday, we'll only have about 45 minutes of that to actually write in. So if you, I'm going to try to go to the, on my phone here, I'm going to try to see where there are questions. And I'm going to type the word test. And if that works, then we'll know that other people can type questions in. So if you can, on your phone, I guess, I don't know how it works for you guys, but if you have a question and you want to ask a question, you can ask it on here and I can look at that. You could also, I guess you could send me an email. I could look at that real fast too for your question, but the questions hopefully aren't too specific to like, is this a good thesis or is that a good thesis, but questions about the essay instead, like the larger questions that you may have. So just as a reminder, when you write this essay, it's you're using the Marjorie Garber lecture, which is on the bottom of the Macbeth page on the right-hand side. And she's going to list in her lecture 10 or 12 different kind of topics. You're choosing 2 of those topics. You decide which ones. And you're just further explaining her argument with your own sort of bent on it, your own take. So when she talks about, you know, the being power hungry, and she uses the example of Macbeth, you can say, you know, an additional or another example of this, or a case where Marjorie Garber doesn't explore, you know, the lust for power is when Lady Macbeth is alone in her room and she gets the letter from Macbeth. So you're really just taking her argument and you're expanding it to another example, or you are manipulating it to take a slightly different view on it. You're not disagreeing with her because she's the expert after all, but you are offering your own perspective. So if you were co-writing it, think about it like this, maybe. If you were co-writing an essay with Marjorie Garber, if she was, oh, I got a question from Abby. I'll answer that in just a second. If she was co-writing an essay with you and she was going to lay the groundwork for it and she just wanted additional examples or additional spins on what she's saying, that's what you're going to say. So that's where you should be spending your time. Remember, in a full sheet of paper, she's like this much of it. She's just the launching point. And then the last 3/5, the last quarter, or 3/4 of your essay, it's all you. Okay, so I'm going to check the message because I don't see any questions in the chat. Do we need a transition in the second body paragraph? So I'm assuming that means from the second body paragraph to the conclusion. And remember, that conclusion is just like a one-sentence ender, you know, reminding us of why the arguments are important or why they're valid. You should have some sort of signal that we're going towards the end of the essay. In conclusion is a little cliche, but you can definitely say in conclusion if you want. You might just say finally, or it is for these reasons, or something that will get us from the end of your body paragraph into your conclusion. So I guess the answer is yes. You do need some transition that signals the analysis is over for all the essay, and we're wrapping it up with the final information. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, send another question and I can answer that. You can also, again, I'm looking at the live chat thing, and I'm typing a comment. I am typing a comment. So if you can see where that is, wherever I typed that, that's where you could also type a question, I guess, and maybe I can respond to it. Otherwise, I'm just typing into a random thing and nobody is seeing what I'm doing, and I'm wasting my time. So you can email or you can type a question, and I'll try to get back to you. Okay, so I wanted to go over again one more time the examples that we used in class on the board to explain the difference between and the claim, because remember, on your own at home tonight, you are writing your kind of skeleton outline. You're coming up with your claims, your two claims, and your thesis, and you're going to have a quote from each Garber for each paragraph and from Macbeth for each paragraph. And Amog, I just saw a question from you. So before I get to that part about the thesis and claim, Amog says he doesn't, he needs some more clarification on what we're writing about. Yes, he asks, are we just taking the arguments from Garber and using them? To a degree, you're taking her initial argument and saying in 3 lines, maybe, this is what Garber says, in like 3 lines. And then the rest of that page is all you saying another example of her position on mysticism, or another example of her position on greed is when this thing happens. This is an example of that because the person says this thing, which indicates this thing, as you would be writing your own analysis. You could almost think about her argument as the prompt for the essay. Furthering her argument. You are taking what she says and expanding on what she says. It's really less about coming up with an original argument, although you are coming up with your original content. You're coming up with your original examples and your original analysis. But you're basing that analysis on what the groundwork, on the framework of what she lays out. So if you've watched the lecture, and you all should have by now, you'd see that she takes questions from the audience, and because the class period is however many minutes it is, it's an hour and 45 minutes or so. There are probably still questions that remain after her lecture is over. So your job is to add clarity to her position, and I hope that helps. If not, send me another question, and I can try to answer that. Oh, look, it was working because I have a question on here too. So I see 3 questions, Rohit, Sai, and Arham, so I'll get to you in that order. Rohit says, do we need to print out a sheet and then fill in the appropriate information that we need for our essay, or should we type out the information and print it? I guess you weren't in class when I handed it out. You'll need to print it out. It needs to be handwritten, so that I can kind of clearly see one that limits the amount you can write in there, because you can type really small, and I'm trying to make sure that you're not outlining an entire essay on what's supposed to just be the claims, the thesis, and your quotes. So handwriting that is kind of a safeguard against that. So if you didn't get a paper copy, then you'll need to print the copy. And it is online. It is under the Macbeth webpage. So you need to do that. I guess typing, it's not the end of the world if you're going to do that, but just know that there will be extra scrutiny, I suppose, when I'm walking around the room and you're writing your essays, just to make sure that there isn't a further outline that like you made and you came up with arguments and you weaved quotes. You're not doing any weaving. You're not doing any arguments. You're just finding your quotes and your claims and thesis statements. Now, on your home today, at your home, you may outline it and kind of know where you're going, but then in class, that's all you. Okay, so next question from Sai. Do we need to assay mean matter for the Garber quote? You can, so what he means for say mean matter, in case you're unfamiliar, is in the analysis, it's what is, so Garber says something, what does that mean and why does that matter? To a little bit, yeah, you need to explain what she means, but you don't need to tell me why it matters. The why it matters will mostly be in your own essay, in your writing, in your original information. So you can clarify her words in the say. So after you've got, Marjorie Garber introduces this idea of greed. And then there's a quote from her, and then you might translate it, this is when this means this thing. It means that Macbeth is pondering all of the possibilities of how he's going to become king. And then that's it. You're not really analyzing what she is providing. That's a really good question. After Sai's question, Arham says, and then I see a Yusra comment, 2 comments, and then some more Arhams. So Arham, can you use more than one quote from Macbeth per claim? You can use more than one quote, but it's not required. So if you want to provide multiple, you're absolutely welcome to. If you can find multiple examples, yes. But remember, the goal is that you are taking snippets and not full block quotes. And then Yusra says, we add clarity by giving an example of what she's talking about from Macbeth, right? Yes, that's right. Exactly. So she's giving an example, and then you're giving additional example or examples if you're Arham and you're trying to really boost your grade. But yes, you're providing an additional example and more if you want. And you might even take her original argument of whatever it is, let's say greed and power, and extend that to, say, it starts off with greed and power, but now it's going to become ambition or something like that. So you can take her original argument and spin it a little bit or direct it a little bit. Okay, so next question, Yusra again, but the example from Macbeth isn't part of the analysis? But the example from Macbeth isn't part of the analysis? Well, it is. You're analyzing that. So you're not analyzing Garber right after the Garber quote. You're analyzing your information. You're justifying why what you're adding to her conversation is valid. Because she's the expert, we don't need to validate her. You don't need to analyze her. You're analyzing what you're adding new to it, like how that fits into the model the Garber provides. Yes, sir, if that doesn't answer your question, ask again or send an email. Arham retracted his 2 questions. Huh. And then Sai asks, will there be a penalty if we use a 1-sentence quote instead of a snippet? No, there's no penalty. No. You may get a comment that says, try to use a snippet. But sometimes you need the whole quote. There is no, exact right or wrong. There is no exact formula. So no, you're not going to be penalized. But I do encourage you to find just the essential parts. So remember also for Shakespeare, he's writing it in verse. And so since he's writing it in verse, the lines will extend. So it may say, your quote may end up being lines 52 to 61, and that may all be one sentence. And you may or may not need all of that. If you just need a part of that, that's great. But if you need more, then you're not going to be penalized. That's a good question. I saw a question come in from Abby. So let me go down here. How would we include Garber's quote in the analysis? You're not analyzing Garber's quote. You're laying it down as the framework. It's almost like it's a fact. You're saying Marjorie Garber said this in her lecture because she believes that feminism is an important role to look at, with the Weird Sisters and the way that the male characters view her. I'm not analyzing that quote at all. What I'm going to do is then say, well, you're not analyzing it like you would in a normal essay. I guess if analysis is just like an explanation of an argument, I suppose you're doing that slightly, but not really. You're going to say, this is, an accurate statement by Garber and can also be seen, in this example. So So you're not really analyzing her in any depth, more than perhaps a quick reference to affirm her argument. Does that make sense? You're not analyzing her, you're analyzing your own support in the essay. So if she provides one example, you provide another, you're analyzing your example. You're justifying how your example fits Garber's larger argument. So again, let me know if that doesn't answer your question, and I will get back to you. Okay, let me see if there are any more questions. Ingrid has a couple. She says, you have a really long quote, and it's really hard to make it all the way. By the way, Ingrid, I'm loving the spelling of really, R-L-Y, really. You're having a really hard time making it into snippets because it kind of need the whole thing. The quote itself looks like a paragraph. Yikes. Should I use several ellipses? If you need like, and again, there's no formula, but if you need like 90% of the quote and you're just removing like one word here and there, then just use the whole thing. Use the whole big part, even if it's a little long. But I would argue that you could probably get your point across, just snippets out of it. So I would say look at that closely and make sure that you really need everything that you currently have as your quote. Okay, and if that doesn't answer your question, you can ask again. I guess when in doubt, maybe add a little bit more than a little bit less. So err on the side of making sure you actually are finding a quote that has enough in it and you're not removing vital parts because you're trying to make just snippets. So err on the side of caution. So I think that answers your, should I cut it down? If you can cut it down, do, but don't cut it down so that you're actually not making the quote say what you want. Haley says, how do we talk about both paragraphs without being specific in the thesis? So I'm going to try to do that dual screen thing. And if maybe somebody can tell me on here if you can see my screen in just a second. I'll show you an example of how you can be broad enough in the thesis and then be more specific in the claim. So send me a message if it works, because I'm going to click a button and I think it's going to work, but I want to be positive. Okay. Let me click that and share. Okay, so can you see on there, can you see a Word document? And does it say Garber's lecture on the supernatural? I know there's a little bit of a delay between the broadcast and my speech. Okay, good. Thank you, Aram. Thank you. And Savannah, thank you. Ooh, I have a whole audience. I feel so special. All right. So that question about Haley's question was, how do we talk about both paragraphs without being specific? So this right here would be an example of the thesis. The first line is the who or the what. This is part one of the claim. Garber's lecture on the supernatural. The second part can also be seen in Lady Macbeth's Cry for the Spirits. And oh wait, I'm sorry. This is the claim. Yep, I'm sorry. I apologize. This is the claim that I typed earlier. It's not the thesis. It's not the it's not the thesis. So the first part is Garber's lecture on the supernatural. Can also be seen in Lady Macbeth's Cry for the Spirits, revealing additional unexplored information. So that is in a body paragraph where I know, coming down the pike in just a few lines, you're going to be telling me about crying for spirits in the supernatural. This second one is an example of how you would write the claim. Let me get my words right. How you would write the thesis statement that would be broad enough and cover the whole essay. So Garber's lecture exploring Macbeth. By saying something like that, we know it's a lecture. And it's not just a lecture, but it's a lecture on Macbeth. And then maybe though informative, leaves more information to be considered. So the argument is we need to look more into what she's writing. And it needs to be done so, and why does it matter? In order to fully appreciate the play. Another spin on the thesis being generic might be Garber's lecture delivered at Harvard University about Macbeth outlines several important issues and that are answered, but could possibly have further explanation. Please don't write that word for word because that was really clumsy, but you get the idea. So you're just referring to the overall argument that there is this lecture and that we're going to add to it. That's the broadness of it. And then each body paragraph is where you're going to specifically say, Garber talks about this, and there's another example of it. Haley, please ask me again if that doesn't answer your question. And then let me see what the next thing is. All right, I guess I'm going to take off the split screen. I guess. And then let me find that. Hold on, sorry. Okay. All right, so I'll answer more questions. Vince asked me, father, if that's a question about paternity. By the way, pater, P-A-T-E-R, is Greek for a word, and you should know what it is. Then I know I'm not your father, as far as I'm aware, and I'm pretty sure I'm aware. And then I got an email from Abby. I'll check that in 1 second. Anna Raquel says, do we need to give her credit such as Marjorie Garber, a Harvard Bard expert? No, you don't need to do, well, you need to refer to her name, which you're going to because it's inevitable. So when you list her quote, you can just say, as Garber explains, or Garber tells her class, or whatever. That signals to me that the quote is from Garber, and so there's no citation needed because you've given her credit that way. And there's no page number to put in parentheses at the end. So for her, no, there's no official citation. Just refer to her by name. The question, also a question from Amog before I get to Abby's. Nope, Abby, and then Amog, sorry. How do we include a Garber quote into the analysis? So again, you're not including, and then she says, sorry, let me read her question out loud. How do we include Garber's quote in the analysis? Also, are we supposed to say another example of Garber's view on, and this is an example because the second half of your question, another example of Garber's view on, and this is an example because, yes, you will say those things. How would we include Garber's quote in the analysis? You're including her quote in the analysis, affirming what she has said. You're, again, not really analyzing her quote. You're just using her quote as the launching point for your evidence. So you're not really truly analyzing her. You're affirming, we're just taking it from, this is fact, what she says. And now here's some additional information. Again, email me again if that question wasn't answered. Amog says, for our body paragraphs, can we use claim, lead-in, evidence, analysis, transition? Yes, you can. So the first evidence being Garber, the second evidence being yours, with the analysis and transition in between. Yes. I might add to that, though, Amog, you might call it CLE little t EAT. Like there's a little transition kind of between her evidence and yours. You don't want to go directly from one quote to another. You need some bridge in between. You need some bridge, but it doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be that much. Another quote. Another question. Abby says, "How do we make a lead for Garber's quote?" So a lead for Garber could be if you've already mentioned Garber by name in the claim, then you need to use her name again in the lead-in. If it's immediately after, you don't. But if it's a line or two later, you may just say, in Garber's lecture, she states, quote, Mr. Womack is the greatest teacher to ever teach a lesson with an egg smashed against a board, or whatever, right? So you're just kind of saying, in Garber's lecture or in Garber's college class or Garber's lecture on Macbeth, that's all the lead-in you need. You don't need to tell me, the setting on a blistering night in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on the campus of Harvard University and Bell Hall. I don't need that kind of thing. You can just tell me this is Garber's words. Vince says, gosh darn, thanks for the essay help, though. You're welcome. You're welcome. And then Jacob says, could you list some main points of Garber's lecture? I cannot. That's for you to do. I'm sorry. I would go through and figure out how to delineate what they're talking about when the topic shifts from one to the other. I cannot, Jacob, I'm so sorry. I cannot tell you. I want you to choose those after you have watched the video. Okay. So I'm looking now. I don't have any new emails. And Jack has asked a question. Should the thesis not have your two main points? The thesis should not. The claim should. Remember, this is one of the big things between a paper you're writing for your history class and the paper you're writing for your English class. And honestly, I don't know why this is, but even in my previous experience in New Jersey before moving here, so 1,000 miles away, the history professors ask for a two-pronged thesis, and the English teachers do not. And it's the same here. So I know in AP World and whatever it is that ninth grade smart kids take, that there is often a two-pronged thesis. We're not doing that. And I'm going to split the screen again for anybody who came in late. And yes, I see a question from you. I'll get to it in a second. The thesis is broadly saying Garber gives this lecture and there's more questions that we need to answer. And the reason for that is because we don't want the redundancy of asking these questions and then asking them again. Now, if you were writing a full introduction, you might allude to them. But all right, I'm going to split the screen again. And okay, so this is the thesis statement. Whoops. So first part, second part, third part. So this is the broad Garber's lecture on Macbeth versus the claim Garber's lecture on the supernatural. Now, you don't want to have the exact same wording, but the supernatural would be one specific argument. And Macbeth is broad because that's encompassing everything. So back down to the thesis. Though informative, leaves more information to be considered. And I'm not sure, honestly, if I might write 4.4 above this because I have informative and information. And I just typed this up, kind of quickly. But the argument that I'm making in the second part, because there has to be an argument in the second part, leaves more information to consider, that there is more that we need to talk about or that we need to write about. And the third part, why does it matter? It matters because we need to appreciate the play. And then you can see up here in the claim, Garber's lecture on supernatural. I'm specifically talking about one area. It can also be seen in Lady Macbeth's cry for the spirits. I'm listing the specific example. And the why it matters is that it leads more about that one specific topic that we need to explore. Jack, if that doesn't answer your question, please let me know. Okay, and then I saw a question from Yusra. You said, so basically her quote is our starting point. Exactly. Yes, it is the starting point. After the claim, you almost immediately want to go into Garber and provide her quote for us so that we know what we're talking about. And then we say this can be seen in Macbeth with a quote. Yes. So I'm going to read Yesra's entire question so that you can understand. Well, I guess you can see it probably too. But it says, so basically her quote is our starting point. We then say this can be seen in Macbeth with a quote. And then we're analyzing our quote and why it relates to her point. Yesra, you said in however many words what I was unable to say in however many minutes I've been doing this. Touche. And then there's a question mark from Yesra because she's impatient. And then Arham said, should the first paragraph just be the thesis? That's all it is. Your first paragraph isn't really a paragraph. There's a one-line thesis statement, and then 2 body paragraphs, and a 1 to 2 line conclusion. Just reminding us that, we've said everything that needs to say. Let me know if that answers you. And I think 2 little arrows from Yesra mean the same thing, like that question up there. But it's not a paragraph. It's a 1-sentence thesis, 2 full body paragraphs, and then a 1-sentence conclusion. Right? All right. There's a question from Amog. And he says, would we have to talk about Garber in our analysis, or would we expand on her claim by analyzing the Macbeth quote? You might do both, honestly. You don't need to pretend Garber doesn't exist once you get to your own quote. You don't need to do that. So if you want to refer back to her, that's fine. And if you want to even tie in her quote, I guess, that's fine as well. But you're not fixating on her. Most of your attention really does need to be directed at your quote, and explaining how your quote kind of fits with that. I hope, Amog, that makes sense. You don't need to drop her name. She's not toxic or something like that. Okay. Okay. So I think right now we are at a pause with questions. My phone is a little low, so I'm going to grab the charger. And while you're waiting, and it's going to be 20 seconds, you're going to look at the street. Isn't that a nice yard? It needs to be mowed. Who wants to mow it for me for free? Okay, give me 1 second. Hey, look who's back. Okay. Okay. All right, so we'll see if there are any other questions that you may have. Okay, so, Ingrid says, I'll mow it if I get Smarties. You get Smarties for basically taking any test in any class. Sure, yes. I will give you a roll of Smarties if you mow my yard. Jacob says, are we allowed to write more than one Macbeth quote and Garber quote on the prep page? If you're going to use them in your essay, then yes, you are. You can write them both down. Yes, that's fine. Per paragraph, I mean, you should have 2 Garber quotes. One in paragraph 1 and one in paragraph 2. And the same thing for Macbeth. But if that question means, are we allowed to have 2 Garber quotes for paragraph 1? You can. I would be careful, though, not to use too much, because you want to make sure that you're giving yourself time to write your own stuff. Remember, you've only got 45 minutes. So you don't want to get too hung up on her once she's listed the argument. But if you need it for clarity, yeah, that's an okay decision. Yesra says, oh, yeah, he said we could use more than one in our essay. Again, Yesra. Again. Ethan Chambers, I'll mow for guaranteed 100 on the essay. And Arham also agrees. And Yesra also agrees. You know what? We should start a yard club where we basically just take care of my yard. And then it can expand into like a parent club, and you can parent my kids. Abby asks, oh, and then there's a question from Harish. Abby asks, in the analysis, do we explain the importance of our example from Macbeth or how it relates to Garber's lecture? Yes. Yes. In the analysis, do we explain the importance of our example from Macbeth? Yes. You will explain the importance of our example from Macbeth and how it relates to Garber's lecture. That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Also, will we get penalized if we do not talk about Garber in the analysis? No, you will not be penalized if you don't talk about Garber. I think it was Jacob earlier who said, was it Jacob? It was somebody that mentioned earlier if we're allowed to mention Garber in the body paragraph beyond like her quote. And yes, you can. You can say, don't spend a lot of time on her, obviously, but you can refer us back and remind us that this is, important as Garber states, or it's another example of Garber. Like, you don't need to have amnesia that she exists, but you just don't want to make her your focus. Oh, there's a real quick question from Abby. For the conclusion, do we have to restate the two topics picked for the body paragraph? You can, and that's fine. Another thing you might think about is just reminding us that Garber's lecture, focusing more on like the thesis. So Garber's lecture is informative, but there's still more that can be explored because this is a great play and there's historical significance behind it, something like that. So, but if you do want to list the body paragraphs, if you want to refer to those, you can. Mostly, I don't want you to get stuck on the conclusion and run out of time. That's mostly why I'm saying a one-sentence conclusion. Transition into it, I'd like you to practice that, like, finally kind of thing, but don't get hung up on the conclusion. All right, so Harish had a question for the stream. Are we supposed to take one idea of Garber and turn that into a thesis and two claims, or take two ideas and they are both a claim? So the thesis, and I don't know if you're joining us late, and if you are, you might go back and watch earlier part of the video, but the thesis is going to explain that there is more to explain from Garber's lecture and that she isn't able to deliver all the information she needs. And then body paragraph 1, you're identifying one of those areas, find out more information about it. In a body paragraph 2, you're identifying another argument and explaining that we need to explore more about it as well. So I don't think your original assertion, are we taking one idea of Garber's and turning that into a thesis? No, that's not true. You're coming up with two of her arguments for your claims, and your thesis states there's more that we need to think about. Okay, pretty sure my neighbors think I'm crazy, the ones that are walking by. Harish, if that didn't answer your question, let me know. And then our home suggests that we negotiate about mowing, and Ethan is adding hashtag the Womers. Clever. Maybe you need a dum-dum. Okay, so somebody, I don't know who Snooze is, S-N-O-O-S, said, should we worry too much about outlining our conclusion? I wouldn't. I mean, you could know what you're going to say, but honestly, I'm looking to see that it's there, I guess, but I'm not, unless there's like a glaring grammatical mistake or a spelling mistake or something like that, I'm not too worried about it. I do want to remind you, though, that you need to underline the title of Macbeth, because it would be italicized if you're typing it, but you're not typing it, you're handwriting it, so you're going to underline it for Macbeth. And then for the citation, in the brackets, for your Macbeth quote, you're putting brackets, right? Shakespeare, space. And then if you remember up on the board, it said like 1.2.58, I think. That first number, and you can use Roman numerals if you'd prefer, but the first number is the act. The second number is the scene, and the third number is the line. There's no space between them. It's just act dot scene dot line, and then in the parentheses. So to clarify that, a couple more questions just came in. Next question is from Abby. For the conclusion, do we have to restate the two topics? Didn't I answer that one? Oh, it's the next one. Ingrid, sorry. Ingrid says, is there a quote from Garber and one from Macbeth for each paragraph? Because I'm confused on how they tie together and correlate. Yes, there is a quote. Remember, Garber is providing the quote that you're using to find that Macbeth quote. So your Macbeth quote is another example of what she has already said. So you do need her direct quote, because she's the one that's going to say, this thing is present and it's in the play. So you need that quote. And then you're going to say another example of that, or Garber is absolutely correct because another occasion is blah, blah, blah. And this is an example of that because, and here's why. So yes, you're including both. You're including both. Harish says, okay, you got it. Can we watch part of the video and use it for our claims instead of watching the entire thing? That's totally up to you. If you think you know the two topics that you want and it's only an hour into it, then that's all you need. There's no way I'm going to know, and I'm not checking it. So that's up to you. If you have time and you want to watch it all, you might, because there are some important things that might be interesting to you towards the end. But if not, if you've got what you need, then no, you don't need to watch it all, officially at least. Okay, and then Abby, I'm glad that helps. So the idea of the essay is a little unusual, and I understand that, which is why even last year there were some questions, but I think it'll make sense to you when you start to put pen to paper. So let me see if there are more questions on my phone. We got, maybe I'll be here another 15 minutes or so. Arham asks a very important question. Do we need a pen and pencil for tomorrow? Yes, you need a pen or a pencil. I don't care which, because you're not typing it, you're handwriting it, which is why you're going to underline Macbeth rather than put it in italics. And you also need paper. I'm not going to have paper for you, so you're going to have your own paper. Sharia says, for the Macbeth quote, what do you mean by putting brackets? I mean, I'm going to split the screen again so that you can see what I'm talking about. So let me figure out how to do that again. Okay. Okay, so if, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit, if the quote from Macbeth is, maybe Macbeth asks himself, is this a dagger I see before me? My parentheses for Macbeth is, and I don't mean Macbeth, it's the citation, Shakespeare space, and that happens in Act 2, 1 dot, and line, I don't know what line it is, 34. That's what I mean by the citation, right? Versus Garber, I might just write, Garber explains that, quote, and then whatever her line is. Chickens run wild in Macbeth. Okay. In this case, I'm italicizing Macbeth because it's the title of the book. And here I'm talking about a character, which is why it's not italicized or underlined. So, but I'm not putting a citation for Garber because I've mentioned Garber's name here, and there's no minute marker that you need to put down. There's no page number that you need to put down. So that would be how you would kind of format both of those. Harish says, why are we using a lecture as evidence source for the essay? It's one so that you can write about a topic that you choose and you can kind of prepare for, versus me just saying, here, write about this. And you may not have any ideas about it at all. And on the day of the essay, you start and you're like, I literally have no idea. So that's the first part, so that you have some options. The second is so that you're watching an upper level discussion that's outside of our classroom or just the facts that I'm presenting, but you're also hearing what these Harvard students are interpreting and what they're understanding about Macbeth. So that is why you're doing that. And that is, if you need more, I can let you know too. So now let me check. Sharia says, okay, I answered that one about the brackets, I think. If not, let me know. Jacob says, are we allowed to use our surface during the essay to find any improv evidence from Macbeth that we might need? No, you're not. You're not. So if you do a thorough job of looking for quotes today, then you won't need that tomorrow. You could always refer to a quote without providing a direct quote, and that would probably be okay since it's a timed writing. But you won't have access to your computer. No, I'm sorry. That's a good question, Jacob. Thank you. Anna Raquel says, sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the video right now, but I can still text in the chat. Well, so why am I reading this to you? So can you answer these questions and then I can see the answers later? Yes, you can do that. So here are the questions. There were some points that I liked in her lecture that she explained a lot more than others. Should I try and stay away from those and stick to the ones that she didn't explain as much? 100% your call. If that's going to present a harder, if it's going to be harder to write original information, if she has outlined everything and there's no questions left, then avoid them. But if she raises a question that you think doesn't fully get answered, that might be easier to come up with original arguments. So I hope that answers your question there. And then you go on to say, Anna Raquel says, because I'm worried I might end up using more of her words than mine. I think that's a very valid point. You don't want to use more of her words than yours, so you do want to be careful about that. And then you also ask, since the introduction is just the thesis, should the thesis be longer than normal, or is the length of the one I showed is acceptable? Which was just I don't know, it was 5 or 6 words for part 1. Maybe 5 or 6 words for part 2 and 5 or 6 words for part 3. And remember to, you can always jazz up a thesis by saying, instead of just Marjorie Garber provides a lecture about blah, 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 you could say, in Marjorie Garber's lecture to Harvard students, she says, right? So we're making it sound more sophisticated. But that's your call. You don't necessarily have to, you don't have to make it long. I'm not trying to check a length. All right, let me unlock my phone, sorry. Okay, I think that's good for the live chat questions, but there is one that came in an email. Daniela says, how exactly are we supposed to analyze? Like, how is the analyzing different from the conclusion? Well, the conclusion, you're not doing any analysis. I assume that means the conclusion, like in the last line of the essay. You're not providing any analysis there. That's just, this is what I stated, and that's why it's important. So the analysis is a justification of why your quote that you found fits the lecture that Garber provides, and perhaps why it fits it, adding to the conversation. You might almost think about it, if it helps to think about it this way, as a almost like if you were in a Socratic seminar. Earlier I said, think about you writing an essay with Marjorie Garber. You're like co-writing a paper, and she provides some information, and you're providing the rest. you could think of it that way. Or if there's a question out there and Marjorie Garber's providing that question, you're adding to it, like in a discussion. So maybe think about it that way. So Anna Raquel, I see more questions here, but let me get to Harish real fast. In email, do we not need a citation for Garber? You don't. Once you say her name, that's all you need. You don't need to put down, the website, YouTube. You don't need to put any of that down. If you were writing a real research paper for some upper level class and you used a video, then you would provide a citation. But for our purposes, we're not doing that. The only citation you'll have is for Macbeth. And then Anna Raquel asks, can we use the examples in Macbeth that Garber used, or does it need to be ones we find? So you're using her initial example, maybe? You could use that. That would be fine. If you were using that to explain what Garber's argument is, to lay that out. But then you do need your own. You're coming up with another one, a second one. And as Jacob said earlier, can we have more than one Macbeth quote per paragraph? You could. So you could come up with multiple. Remember, though, snippets are better than like full length quotes. Harish says, in the analysis, are we connecting Garber and Macbeth or explaining the topic? Garber explains. You are doing both. So your quote, you're connecting Garber to it. You're saying this is another example of what she's talking about. And she's talking about this issue of feminism, or whatever the case may be. You're spending more time, though, on the connection. But you don't need to pretend like you don't need to refer to Garber or explain her topic. Like, you may find that you need to not justify, sorry, that's the wrong word. You may find that you need to explain what her argument is in order to make your writing clear. So you can explain her, but that shouldn't be the bulk of it. The bulk of it should be the connection. If that doesn't make sense, send me another question. And that's, I think, where I am for comments right now. So got a few more minutes. If you have questions, then I can answer them. Otherwise, you can always go back and watch this again. So I want to show you, in case someone later on is unsure where to go, I'm going to split the screen again real fast. Nothing groundbreaking here, but I want to be able to make sure that everybody had access. Oh, and if anybody is friends with Delaney McGowan, I was supposed to speak with her a little bit more about the essay yesterday, but we didn't get a chance. If you could refer her to this video or to the website that has that stuff posted, I would appreciate that. So on my website, and of course that's the live stream, that would be freaky if I played that right now. Under books, this is where we get to the Macbeth lecture by Garber, down here at the bottom. So this is the lady.
A practitioner of the state religion, but equivocate.
So she's talking about state religion and equivocating. That might be what you're starting with, right? And then the question of the outline, the essay prompt. This is where you're doing that. And your thesis statement, and you can write this word for word on the day of the essay, which is tomorrow. Same thing for the claims, word for word, Garber quotes, and that's it. No other outline. Here is like a chart to help you also. Remember, that's on the back side of the essay prompt. So I just wanted to make sure you guys knew where those things were. Maybe finally, again, this is an example of a claim. Garber's lecture on the supernatural can also be seen in Lady Macbeth's cry for help, or cry for the spirits, excuse me, revealing additional unexplored information. And then this is an example of a thesis. Garber's lecture exploring Macbeth, which is broad, though informative, leaves more information to consider in order to fully appreciate the play. Okay, so I think that maybe answers those questions. My sisters-in-law are chatting, which is always fun. Do you have any other recommendations for the essay? That's a really good question. So I would recommend that you look at the previous essay, which I didn't collect. I never took back up. And I would make sure that for the comments that have 4 point something, that you understand what those are. And those are like the 4.8 comments. Those are also available on the comment tracker guide thing. That's on my website under writing materials. I would make sure you understand you can't use personal pronouns. It's really tempting to use contractions in a timed writing because you're writing as fast as you can. So I would be aware of that. I would be really cautious about using absolutes. And again, because you're writing in such a short time, the temptation is to kind of write whatever comes out of your brain as you're doing it, and not really think about what you're writing. So I would look at those comments in particular. And although you don't have to outline the essay, honestly, you could probably kind of have a test write at home, and know some of the things you want to write, which would make it a little bit easier tomorrow. So that's maybe my other suggestion for the essay. I don't want you guys to freak out though. A timed write, especially the first one, I'll grade much more leniently, especially in the analysis. Because the claims and the thesis can be written ahead of time, the expectation is that those are really good and that they're polished because you're writing them ahead of time. So just be aware of that also. Like, make sure that your claim and your thesis are actually good. Shreya says, in what area do people make the most mistakes? And do you have any suggestions to avoid making those mistakes? I think just those areas I mentioned, and they're minor things, so I'm not too hung up on them, but I do have to point them out. But the contractions and the absolutes and the informal language, people get caught in the moment of trying to speed through it, and then they get a few points dinged off for that. I think another thing that people suffer in all essays is that they lose focus and they start going off writing in a tangent. And that's a lot of times because they don't really know what their argument is, or they start off with an argument, and because they're writing it in the heat of the moment, their brain kind of takes them somewhere. So pause every 5 minutes or 3 minutes maybe, and look back at what you've written and make sure that you are still answering the question, or you're referring back to the claim. You're making sure you're on topic. So that would probably be pretty important too. And I think I'm up to date on my questions on the inbox. So if you have any other questions, if you could send those now. Oh, there's one for Harish. Spend a lot of time proofreading. If you get done writing early, then definitely proofread. I had in the past kids who get done and have 20 minutes left, and they turn in their essay, and then there are a lot of mistakes in it. So yeah, I mean, if you have time, but I also have students who are writing as the bell is ringing and they just don't have time to proofread. So you got to pace yourself. And that's one of the reasons also why we do the timed writings, so that you can get used to writing in a short segment of time. If you're practicing that in APs, like in your world or history or whatever else, then it's not so foreign to you, but it is to a lot of people. I may have answered this before. Harish says, will you be more lenient on this essay than on the process? Yes, absolutely. Oh, and that's when you said, well, I need to spend time writing the essay and proofreading. If you have time, you can proofread. Proofread while you go along is probably better, so that you can kind of keep track of your time, honestly. And then he's asking also, what is the official prompt? It's on that form that I don't have in front of me. It's on that form that where you're putting your quotes, which is on the website. And if you need me to, let me know and I can show you where that is again. Oh, really good question from Abby. Does it have to be in present tense? Yes. So Macbeth grabbed Macbeth. That's a great name. Macbeth grabs the dagger, not Macbeth grabbed the dagger, but he's doing it, right? Garber reminds her class instead of Garber reminded the class. Present tense and active voice are much more interesting to read, and they make your essay stronger. I'm going to give us another minute or so to ask any questions, either in the chat or in the email. And if you have questions, I'll answer them now. Otherwise, in the next 60 seconds or so, I will tell you goodbye, go take a 10-minute nap, make a shopping list, go to the store, cook dinner. The yard's not mowed yet. So 1 minute. It's tiring talking this long. How do you guys listen to me all the time? The essays in the past for this topic, and I think part of that is also, they've been good. I want to say that they're an improvement. And I think part of that is that as far as numerical scores go, they're higher because I'm grading a little more lenient, but I think also there is something to be said about figuring out what a teacher is looking for and writing to that. And unfortunately, that's a little bit like playing the game, you know, like jumping through hoops. And I don't really like hoops, but there are style issues that some people fixate on and some don't. And so it's good to try to work those out. And so usually the second essay is better. Yeah, Arham, I feel you, man. It's hard to know what the audience means, or what the audience is looking for. So with the first essay, if you look at those comments and you think about the things I identified, you probably get a good picture, or clearer picture maybe, of what my expectations are. So Harish has a question, and maybe we'll end with this. By the time I answer this, if nobody else types a question, then we'll assume this is it. The Womers, okay. The Womers will mow your lawn for you. We just need your address. Ha! I live in Johns Creek. How about we stick with that? And my neighborhood is partially behind me, and I have a blue house, as you can see. Okay, well, I think that's it. What do people say in their videos? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment down below. Don't do any of that. Unless you think there is somebody in the class who could have used this lecture, not the lecture, but the conversation, and they didn't get a chance to. So please do let them know that. And again, if you have access, you're welcome. If you have access to like get a hold of Delaney, because I didn't get to talk to her, so she can check out this video for any questions that she may have as well. So, hope you guys have a good day. I hope this worked out well. I guess we can try this again sometime if there's another assignment that that is particularly puzzling, or I do a crappy job of kind of explaining in person. So, okay. Bye, guys. Thanks so much. Enjoy your Sunday. Spend some time with your families, too. Make sure that you... oh, good. Thank you, Aram. Make sure you spend some time with your family and relax and have a little bit of a fun time today. Try to do something nice. There is, because you have a major assessment tomorrow with my essay, there is some candy at stake. So don't forget, paper and pencil. Good luck. You can still email me questions tonight, and I'll try to get to them, although I do have a busy kind of early afternoon. So, all right, bye.